You're scrolling through social media and see yet another New Year's celebration, another party, another promise of radical transformation. Everyone around you seems to be dancing toward the future with a lightness you can't feel. While they plan, dream, and celebrate, you're here, just trying to get through another day, just trying to breathe, just trying to survive. And in this painful contrast between others' euphoria and your silent struggle, you wonder if there's something fundamentally wrong with you, if you're the only one who can't join this collective dance toward tomorrow. Albert Camus knew this feeling. He understood this abyssal difference between those who celebrate the future and those who simply try to survive the present. There's a peculiar cruelty in living in a society obsessed with the future when you're fighting to get through the hours of the present day. While the world around you builds 5-year plans, ambitious goals, and grandiose visions of what's to come, you find yourself in a much more primitive and much more real battle. The battle of getting out of bed. The battle of finding a reason to continue. The battle of not letting yourself be consumed by the existential weight of simply being here, conscious, in a reality that often seems hostile or indifferent to your presence. Camus would call this an encounter with the absurd, that moment when the disparity between our fundamental human needs and the apparent absence of answers from the universe becomes impossible to ignore. It's not that you're pessimistic or that you've chosen to be melancholic. It's that you're being honest about the nature of human experience in a way that our culture often refuses to acknowledge. You're looking directly at what most people prefer to cover with layers of forced optimism and future projections. The difference between celebrating the future and trying to survive isn't a matter of personality or conscious choice. It's a matter of where you find yourself in the existential journey of understanding what it means to be alive in a universe that offers no guarantees, clear explanations, or pre-established purpose. Those who celebrate the future often still believe, consciously or unconsciously, that there's some greater narrative, some hidden meaning, some promise that things will get better if we just follow the right rituals, make the proper plans, maintain appropriate faith in progress. They still operate within what Camus would call hope, even if it's secular hope disguised as ambition, personal growth, or life optimization. Those who are simply trying to survive have reached a point of brutal clarity about the human condition. They've seen through the consoling illusions and found themselves face to face with the absurdity of existence. They can no longer pretend that the future carries inherent promises of meaning or happiness. They can no longer let themselves be lulled by the collective fantasy that we're all marching toward something better, more complete, more satisfying. This lucidity, however painful, is also a form of courage. When you're just trying to survive, you're refusing to participate in the great collective performance of optimism that our society considers mandatory. You're saying no to social expectations that we should always be growing, evolving, moving toward better versions of ourselves. You're recognizing that life in its most naked essence is often a matter of resistance, of persistence, of continuing to exist even when there are no clear or convincing reasons to do so. And this, according to Camus, isn't a failure or pathology. It's a deeply human and deeply honest response to the reality of our condition. When you stop trying to force meaning where it doesn't naturally exist, when you stop looking for purpose in external structures and future promises, you encounter something both terrifying and liberating. You encounter your own radical freedom to exist without justifications. The world celebrates the future because it needs to believe there's a direction, a destination, a reason for all the effort and pain of the present. It's easier to bear today's difficulties if we can convince ourselves they're investments in a better tomorrow. It's more comfortable to maintain the illusion of progress, of evolution, that we're all on a collective journey towards something higher. But you, who are just trying to survive, have discovered something they haven't yet discovered or prefer not to see. You've discovered that the present is all we really have, that each moment of consciousness is complete in itself, not a step on a ladder leading somewhere better, that life doesn't need to be justified by its future results or its impact on the grand scheme of things. It can simply be lived, moment by moment, breath by breath, without the need to fit it into a larger narrative of progress or purpose. This realization can be devastating at first. When you realize there's no divine plan, that there are no guarantees that today's suffering will result in tomorrow's joy, that there's no cosmic force orchestrating the events of your life toward a satisfying ending, you can feel lost in the void. You can feel like you've lost your footing, that there's nothing left to lean on. Everyone around you continues building their castles of future hope, while you find yourself in a landscape stripped of illusions, confronting the apparently meaningless nature of existence. But it's precisely at this point, in this moment of complete stripping away of consoling fantasies, that Camus suggests we find the possibility of an authentically lived life. When we stop looking for meaning in external structures, in future promises, in collective narratives of progress, we discover that we can create meaning through the very act of living, of choosing to continue, of affirming our existence against the apparent absurdity of the universe. Your struggle to survive isn't a symptom of weakness or personal failure, it's a symptom of lucidity. You're seeing life as it really is, stripped of the comforting ornaments that most people need to function. You're experiencing what Camus called the feeling of the absurd, that sense of displacement that arises when we perceive the disproportion between our human needs for meaning and clarity and the mute and indecipherable nature of the world around us. It's not pathological depression, though it might be confused with one. It's a natural philosophical response to a profound existential realization. It's what happens when an honest consciousness encounters fundamental truths about the human condition, without the protection of culturally accepted illusions. While others celebrate the future, planning their dream vacations, their professional promotions, their perfect relationships, their personal transformations, you're dealing with much more fundamental questions. You're wondering why wake up tomorrow? Why continue participating in a reality that often seems meaningless or hostile? Why invest energy in activities that, in the end, don't alter the basic fact that we're all here temporarily, without clear instructions, in an existence we didn't ask for, and that will eventually end? These aren't morbid or pathological questions. They're the most important questions a human consciousness can ask. And the fact that you're asking these questions, that you're feeling their weight, indicates that you're living at a depth that many others haven't yet reached or consciously avoid. The collective celebration of the future often functions as a form of collective denial of the present. When we're always looking forward to what comes next, to what we can become, we avoid confronting what we are now, in this moment, with all our limitations, vulnerabilities, and uncertainties. The obsession with the future is a way of escaping the immediate reality of our human condition. It's easier to fantasize about the person we'll be next year than to fully accept who we are today. It's more comfortable to believe that happiness is always a little further ahead than to recognize that, if it exists, it must be found now, in current circumstances, with all their imperfections. But you, who are just trying to survive, don't have the luxury of that escape. You're confronting the present in all its rawness, in all its ambiguity, in all its lack of guarantees. Tell me in the comments, you feel this too. This difference between you and people who seem to dance easily toward the future. Write simply, I feel this, because I need you to know that you're not alone in this experience. Your honesty about the difficulty of simply existing, your refusal to fake optimism you don't feel, your courage to look directly at the absurdity of the human condition, all of this resonates with other people who are going through the same journey of existential awakening. When you share your experience, even if it's just with a few simple words, you're helping other people feel less isolated in their own struggles with the weight of conscious existence. Your voice matters precisely because it comes from a place of naked truth, not disguised by social conventions of mandatory positivity. There's a fundamental difference between giving up and simply recognizing the reality of things as they are. Those who are just trying to survive haven't given up on life. They've given up on fantasies about life. They've stopped expecting it to become something different from what it is. They've stopped conditioning their acceptance of reality on the promise that it will improve in the future. And in this radical acceptance of the present, in this willingness to exist without guarantees or satisfactory explanations, there's a form of silent heroism that our culture rarely recognizes or honors. Camus would call this absurd revolt, this decision to continue living and affirming life, even after recognizing its apparent lack of inherent meaning. It's not a revolt against specific circumstances that can be changed. It's a revolt against the human condition itself, a refusal to accept that the lack of cosmic meaning should result in surrender or despair. Your experience of just trying to survive while others celebrate the future isn't a personal anomaly. It's part of a broader pattern of how different people respond to awakening to the absurd nature of existence. Some never fully wake up to this reality and manage to live their entire lives within prefabricated structures of meaning, whether religious, ideological, cultural, or personal. Others wake up gradually and find ways to rebuild meaning after the initial period of disorientation. But some, like you, go through an extended period of direct confrontation with the void, with the apparent absence of inherent purpose, with the naked reality of the human condition. This period can be extremely difficult because you're navigating existential territory for which our culture offers very little support or genuine understanding. Society has elaborate rituals for celebrating births, graduations, weddings, promotions, retirements. It has festivals to mark seasonal changes, New Year's, collective achievements. It has an entire industry dedicated to feeding hopes about the future, from life coaches to self-help gurus, from financial planners to career counselors. But it has very little space to honor those who are simply trying to exist, who are fighting silent battles against the weight of consciousness, who are trying to find reasons to continue that don't depend on external promises or future projections. There's very little cultural recognition that just being here, just continuing to breathe and exist in the midst of apparent meaninglessness, is itself a form of courage and a profound affirmation of life. When you're just trying to survive, you're not participating in the great collective narrative of progress and optimization. You're not contributing to the gross domestic product of hope. You're not feeding the cultural machine that transforms existential anxiety into consumption of products and services that promise transformation. You're existing outside the normal circuits of motivation and ambition that keep our society functioning. And this can make you feel like an outsider, like someone who didn't understand the rules of the game, like someone being left behind while everyone else advances toward their bright destinies. But the truth is that you might be seeing something they haven't seen yet, or that they're avoiding seeing. You might be experiencing a form of lucidity that, while painful, is also more honest about the real nature of human experience. The constant celebration of the future can be a form of addiction, a cultural drug that keeps us functioning, producing, consuming, participating, without ever stopping to question whether all this activity really takes us somewhere meaningful. The future becomes a projection of all our unrealized desires, of all our current dissatisfactions, of all our hopes that life will eventually become what we think it should be. But you, who are just trying to survive, may have realized that this projection is fundamentally illusory, that the future, when it arrives, rarely corresponds to our fantasies about it, that each future moment simply becomes another present to be lived, with its own limitations, challenges, and ambiguities. That the happiness promised for tomorrow is often postponed to the next day, and then to the next month, and then to the next year, in an infinite progression that never really reaches a satisfactory resolution. This realization can be liberating, even if it's initially devastating. When you stop expecting the future to solve the fundamental dilemmas of existence, you're free to find value in the immediate present. When you stop conditioning your acceptance of life on the promise that it will improve, you can begin to discover ways to affirm it, even in its current conditions. When you stop looking for meaning in external structures and collective narratives, you can begin to create meaning through your own choices, your own actions, your own decision to continue existing against all evidence that existence is fundamentally absurd. Camus suggested this was the only genuine form of human freedom. The freedom to affirm life not because it has inherent meaning or clear direction, but simply because we choose to affirm it. If you're recognizing yourself in these words, if you identify more with the experience of trying to survive than with the experience of celebrating the future, I want you to know that there's a silent community of people who share this existential journey, people who are questioning the dominant narratives about progress, purpose, and mandatory optimism, people who are discovering that living authentically sometimes means admitting that you don't know where you're going or why you're going there. If these reflections make sense to you, if you feel like someone is finally talking about your real experience instead of trying to sell you a sugar-coated version of life, consider subscribing to this channel. Not because I have definitive answers or magical solutions, but because I believe there's value in exploring these questions together, in creating space for honest conversations about what it really means to be alive in a universe that often seems indifferent to our presence. The difference between celebrating the future and trying to survive isn't permanent or definitive. It's possible to transition between these states. It's possible to find ways to honor both the difficulty of the present and the possibilities of the future without denying the reality of either. But first, it's necessary to go through the process of honestly recognizing where you are, without judgment, without pressure to be somewhere else. If you're just trying to survive, that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, or that you need to force yourself to feel optimism that isn't genuine. It means you're in a specific phase of existential awakening, confronting truths about the human condition that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. This confrontation is courageous, even if it doesn't feel like courage. It's honest, even if it's painful. It's necessary, even if it's difficult. Camus reminds us that we don't have to choose between total despair and forced optimism. There's a third option, which he called lucid revolt. The willingness to continue living and affirming life even after recognizing that it doesn't come with guarantees or satisfactory explanations. The refusal to surrender to nihilism, but also the refusal to delude ourselves with false hopes. The capacity to find value in existence itself, not because it leads somewhere specific, but because we choose it, moment by moment, breath by breath. When you're just trying to survive, you may not realize it, but you're practicing this form of existential heroism. You're saying yes to life, even when it's not offering convincing reasons for that yes. You're affirming your humanity against the apparent indifference of the universe. You're creating meaning through the very act of persisting, of continuing, of refusing to surrender completely to the void. And perhaps it's precisely this difference, this tension between those who celebrate the future and those who try to survive the present, that keeps our humanity alive and honest. Perhaps we need people who see through illusions, who question dominant narratives, who refuse to fake optimism when they don't genuinely feel it. Perhaps your silent struggle, your refusal to participate in the collective dance toward the future, your insistence on confronting the naked reality of existence is a necessary contribution to humanity's collective consciousness. Your honesty about the difficulty of simply being alive may be exactly what other people need to hear to feel less alone in their own existential struggles. Your courage to not pretend everything is fine when it isn't may be the invitation someone needs to stop pretending too and start living more authentically. In this sense, your survival isn't just a personal act of resistance, but a gift to the world, a way of keeping alive the possibility of truth in a culture often obsessed with comforting illusions.